The rain drummed against the windows of Rosie's diner as Maya wiped down the last table of her evening shift. Her feet ached from standing for 12 hours straight, but she couldn't complain. This job put food on the table for her 2 kids at home, and in today's world that was more than many people had. The clock on the wall showed 9:30. Only 30 minutes until closing time. Maya had already started cleaning the coffee machine when she heard the little bell above the door chime. She looked up to see an older man stepping inside, shaking raindrops from a faded military jacket. The man moved slowly, like someone who had walked many miles in his lifetime. His hair was gray and thinning, and deep lines mapped the geography of his face. But it was his eyes that caught Maya's attention. They held a sadness she recognized, the kind that comes from seeing too much and having too little. He stood by the door for a moment, scanning the nearly empty diner. Maya watched as his gaze moved from the daily specials board to the prices listed beneath each item. His shoulders seemed to sag a little more with each number he read. "Good evening," Maya called out, grabbing a menu from behind the counter. "Please sit anywhere you'd like." The man chose a booth near the window and accepted the menu with a quiet "thank you." Maya noticed his hands shook slightly as he opened it. She gave him space to decide, continuing her closing routine while keeping one eye on her customer. From across the diner, she could see him studying every item carefully. His finger traced down the prices column, and she watched his expression change. The hope in his eyes dimmed with each passing moment. Maya had seen this look before. It was the same expression her mother used to get when Maya was little, standing in the grocery store checkout line, silently calculating whether they had enough money for everything in their cart. After what felt like forever, the man closed the menu and waited. Maya approached his table with her notepad ready. "What can I get you tonight?" she asked with her warmest smile. The man cleared his throat. "Just coffee, please. And maybe, do you have any toast?" Maya glanced at the menu in front of him. The daily special was meatloaf with mashed potatoes and green beans for $12.95. She had watched him look at it 3 times. "Just coffee and toast?" she asked gently. "Yes, ma'am. That'll do me just fine." Something in his voice told Maya everything she needed to know. This wasn't about preference. This was about what he could afford. She jotted down his order and headed back to the kitchen. As she poured his coffee, Maya found herself thinking about her own grandfather. He had served in Vietnam and came home to a world that didn't always appreciate his sacrifice. He used to tell her stories about the kindness of strangers during his hardest times, how a simple meal or a kind word could mean the difference between hope and despair. Maya returned to the table with the coffee and a small plate of toast. The man reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn wallet. His movements were careful, deliberate, like someone who knew exactly how much money they had down to the last penny. "That'll be $4.50, Maya said. The man handed her a credit card that looked like it had seen better days. Maya took it to the register and ran it through the machine. After a few seconds, the screen displayed those dreaded words. "Declined." She tried it again, hoping it was just a machine error. "Declined" appeared once more. Maya looked back at the man. He was sitting up straighter now, as if he could sense what was happening. The embarrassment was already creeping across his face. She walked back to his table, the declined card in her hand. Before she could say anything, he spoke. "It didn't work, did it?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Sometimes these machines act up," Maya said, though they both knew that wasn't the case. The man started to stand. "I'm sorry. I thought I had enough. I'll just go." "Wait," Maya said quickly. "Please sit back down." She looked around the diner. Her manager had left an hour ago, and the cook was already cleaning his station. It was just her and this man who reminded her so much of her grandfather. Maya made a decision that came straight from her heart. "Your meal is on the house tonight," she said. The man's eyes widened. "Oh no, I couldn't possibly. Actually, you know what? I made a mistake with your order anyway." Maya kept her voice light and matter-of-fact. "I forgot to tell the cook you wanted the daily special instead of just toast." "Miss, I can't accept." "It's already cooking," Maya lied smoothly. "It would just go to waste otherwise." She hurried back to the kitchen before he could protest further. The cook, a kind man named Pedro, looked at her questioningly as she ordered the meatloaf special. "Table 6 changed their mind," she said, pulling out her own wallet. "I'll cover it." Pedro nodded without asking questions. He had worked at Rosie's long enough to understand that sometimes people needed a little help. And Maya was the type of person who would always provide it. 20 minutes later, Maya set a full plate in front of the man. Steam rose from the meatloaf and mashed potatoes, and the green beans were cooked just the way Rosie's was famous for. The man stared at the plate for a long moment before looking up at Maya. His eyes were glistening. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "No thanks needed," Maya replied. "Just enjoy your meal." As the man ate, Maya finished her closing duties. She could see him savoring every bite, eating slowly like someone who wasn't sure when their next good meal might come. It reminded her of how she ate during the lean months after her divorce, when every meal was precious. When he finished, the man sat back in his booth with a satisfied sigh. Maya brought him a fresh cup of coffee, and they fell into easy conversation. His name was Robert, and he had served 3 tours overseas. He told her about his wife, who had passed away 2 years ago, and how he had been struggling since then. Not just with money, but with purpose. "Some days I wonder if anyone remembers what we did over there," he said quietly. "If it mattered." Maya sat down across from him. "It mattered. It still matters." Robert nodded slowly. "Your grandfather, you said he served?" "Vietnam. He used to tell me that the real heroes were the people who showed kindness when no one was watching." They talked until closing time. When Robert finally got up to leave, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out something small and round. "I want you to have this," he said, placing a military coin on the table. Maya picked it up. It was heavy and worn smooth in places with an eagle emblem she didn't recognize. "I can't take this," she said. "I've carried that coin for 40 years. It's brought me luck through some of the darkest times imaginable." Robert's voice was steady now, filled with a conviction that hadn't been there when he first walked in. "Tonight you reminded me that kindness is the greatest force in this world. That coin belongs with someone who understands that." Maya felt the weight of the coin in her palm. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Robert gathered his jacket and headed toward the door. Before leaving, he turned back one more time. "Thank you, Maya. For the meal, yes, but more than that. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" Maya asked. "Hope." The bell chimed as he disappeared into the rainy night. Maya stood alone in the empty diner, holding the mysterious coin and wondering about the man whose faith she had somehow restored with nothing more than a plate of meatloaf and a moment of human kindness. She had no idea that this simple act would change both their lives forever. Maya's alarm clock screamed at 5:30 in the morning, just like it had every day for the past 3 years. She rolled out of bed, her body still tired from the long shift the night before. The military coin from Robert sat on her nightstand, catching the early morning light streaming through her bedroom window. She picked it up and studied it again, just as she had done several times before falling asleep. There was something special about it, though she couldn't put her finger on what. The metal felt warm in her hand, and the eagle engraved on its surface seemed to look right through her. After getting her kids ready for school and dropping them off, Maya drove toward Rosie's diner for another day of work. She took the same route she always did, turning onto Maple Street 3 blocks from the restaurant. But today something was different. The street was blocked. Maya slowed her car, confused. Orange cones lined the road, and she could see people gathered on the sidewalks ahead. Her first thought was an accident, maybe a water main break. But as she got closer, her confusion turned to shock. 2 massive military vehicles sat parked directly in front of Rosie's diner. Maya pulled over and parked as close as she could get. Her heart was already pounding as she walked toward the scene. The vehicles weren't like anything she had seen in person before. They were huge, painted in military green, with thick armor plating and wheels that looked like they could drive through a brick wall. Uniformed soldiers moved around the perimeter with purpose. Some held clipboards, others spoke into radios. None of them looked like they were there for breakfast. A crowd of neighbors and early morning commuters had gathered on the sidewalk across the street. Maya recognized Mrs. Chen from the flower shop and Bobby from the gas station, all staring at the scene with the same bewildered expression she felt on her own face. "What's going on?" Maya asked Mrs. Chen. "Nobody knows," the older woman replied, shaking her head. "How they owned the place." Maya looked around for Mrs. Rodriguez, the diner's owner. She spotted her standing near the blocked entrance to her own restaurant, talking animatedly with a woman in uniform. Even from a distance, Maya could see the stress written all over Mrs. Rodriguez's face. The military coin felt heavy in Maya's pocket. She had brought it with her, intending to research it during her break. Now, as she stared at the soldiers surrounding her workplace, an uncomfortable thought began forming in her mind. Could this have something to do with Robert? The idea seemed crazy. He was just an elderly veteran who couldn't afford dinner. What could he possibly have to do with military vehicles taking over a small neighborhood diner? But the timing was too strange to ignore. Maya made her way through the crowd, trying to get closer to Mrs. Rodriguez. As she approached, she caught fragments of the conversation between her boss and the uniformed woman. Completely understand your frustration. Ma'am, but this is a matter of national security. My business. I have customers coming for breakfast in 30 minutes. Temporary situation, I assure you. National security? Maya's stomach dropped. What had she gotten herself into? She was about to approach Mrs. Rodriguez when she noticed one of the soldiers looking directly at her. He was a young man, maybe in his 20s, with the kind of serious expression that military training seems to create. Their eyes met for just a moment before he turned and spoke quietly into his radio. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. A few seconds later, an older woman in uniform approached the young soldier. She had short gray hair and the bearing of someone used to being in command. The soldier pointed in Maya's direction, and the woman's gaze followed. Maya's instinct was to run. Everything about this situation felt wrong, but her feet wouldn't move. She stood frozen as the woman in uniform walked directly toward her. "Excuse me," the woman said when she reached Maya. Her voice was firm but not unfriendly. "Are you Maya Johnson?" The question hit Maya like a physical blow. How did this woman know her name? Yes, Maya managed to say. "I'm Colonel Williams. We need to speak with you." The crowd of onlookers was watching now. Maya could feel their curious stares burning into her back. Mrs. Chen looked like her eyes might pop out of her head. "About what?" Maya asked, though she suspected she already knew. About Sergeant Robert Hayes. There it was. The confirmation of what Maya had been fearing since she first saw the military vehicles. Somehow, her simple act of kindness the night before had triggered something much bigger than she could have imagined. "Is he in trouble?" Maya asked. "Because if buying someone dinner is illegal now," Colonel Williams held up a hand. "Sergeant Hayes isn't in trouble, Ms. Johnson, and neither are you. But we do need to explain what's happening here." Maya looked around at the soldiers, the vehicles, the blocked street, the growing crowd of curious neighbors. "This is all because I paid for his dinner?" In a way, yes. The colonel's answer didn't make Maya feel any better. If anything, it made her more confused. "I don't understand," Maya said. "We know you don't, that's why we're here." Colonel Williams gestured toward one of the military vehicles. "Would you mind if we spoke privately?" Maya hesitated. Everything in her body was screaming that this was a bad idea. But what choice did she have? These people clearly weren't going away, and they obviously knew more about last night than she did. "Am I in trouble?" she asked again. "Absolutely not," Colonel Williams assured her. "But there are things about Sergeant Hayes that you need to know. Things that will help you understand why your kindness last night was more important than you could possibly realize." Maya nodded slowly. "Okay." As they walked toward the vehicle, Maya caught Mrs. Rodriguez's eye. Her boss looked frightened and confused, and Maya felt terrible that her workplace was being turned upside down because of something she had done. "What about the diner?" Maya asked. "Mrs. Rodriguez needs to open for business." "The diner will be fine," Colonel Williams said. "In fact, after today it might be busier than it's ever been." That cryptic comment only added to Maya's confusion. As they reached the military vehicle, another soldier opened the back door. The interior looked like a mobile office with computers and communication equipment lining the walls. Colonel Williams invited Maya to sit, then took the seat across from her. For a moment they sat in silence while the colonel seemed to gather her thoughts. "Ms. Johnson," she finally said, "what do you know about the Congressional Medal of Honor?" Maya blinked. "It's the highest military decoration, right? For people who show exceptional bravery in combat." "That's correct. It's awarded to individuals who distinguish themselves through conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty." "Okay," Maya said slowly, not seeing where this was going. "Tomorrow, at a ceremony in Washington, D.C., Sergeant Robert Hayes will receive the Congressional Medal of Honor for actions he took during combat operations 43 years ago." Maya stared at Colonel Williams, trying to process what she had just heard. Robert is getting the Medal of Honor? He is. But here's what makes this situation unique, Ms. Johnson. Last night, after leaving your restaurant, Sergeant Hayes called his former commanding officer. It was the first time he had reached out to anyone from his military service in over 15 years. Maya felt like the world was spinning around her. What did he say? He told his former CO that a young woman's kindness had reminded him why he had fought in the first place. He said that for the first time in years, he felt worthy of the honor he was about to receive. The weight of Colonel Williams' words settled over Maya like a blanket. She thought about Robert sitting in that booth, carefully counting prices, too proud to accept charity until she found a way to offer it without damaging his dignity. He also made a specific request. Colonel Williams continued. What kind of request? He asked that you be invited to attend the ceremony as his personal guest. He said he wanted the woman who reminded him of the goodness in the world to be there when he received recognition for defending it. Maya felt tears forming in her eyes. He wants me at the ceremony? The President of the United States will be there, Ms. Johnson. Military leaders from around the world, media from every major news outlet, and Sergeant Hayes specifically requested that you be seated in the front row as his honored guest. The implications of what Colonel Williams was saying began to dawn on Maya. This wasn't just about a dinner anymore. This was about a war hero who had carried pain and isolation for decades, until one moment of kindness from a stranger reminded him of his own worth. The vehicles, the soldiers, all of this, Maya gestured around her. Security protocols, Colonel Williams explained. When a Medal of Honor recipient makes a special request involving a civilian, we take it very seriously. We needed to verify your identity, conduct background checks, and arrange transportation. Maya laughed, but it came out sounding more like a sob. All of this because I bought a man dinner. All of this because you saw a fellow human being in need and responded with compassion, Colonel Williams corrected. Do you have any idea how rare that is, Ms. Johnson? Through the vehicle's window, Maya could see the crowd of neighbors still gathered on the sidewalk. Mrs. Rodriguez was pacing back and forth, probably wondering if her diner was somehow involved in a terrorist investigation. What happens now? Maya asked. Colonel Williams smiled for the first time since their conversation began. Now, Ms. Johnson, you get to witness something that very few people ever see. You get to watch a true American hero receive the recognition he has deserved for over 40 years. Maya reached into her pocket and pulled out the military coin Robert had given her. She held it up for Colonel Williams to see. The colonel's expression changed immediately. Her eyes widened as she leaned forward to get a better look. Where did you get that? She asked, her voice suddenly urgent. Robert gave it to me last night. He said it had brought him luck for 40 years. Colonel Williams carefully took the coin from Maya's hand and examined it closely. After a moment, she looked up with an expression of amazement. Ms. Johnson, do you have any idea what this is? Maya shook her head. This is a unit commendation coin from Sergeant Hayes's commanding officer. It was given to him immediately after the battle that earned him the Medal of Honor. Colonel Williams handed the coin back to Maya with obvious reverence. There are fewer than a dozen of these in existence. It's worth more than most people make in a year. Maya stared at the coin in her palm. He just gave it to me. Because you gave him something far more valuable, Colonel Williams said quietly. You gave him back his sense of purpose. Outside the vehicle, Maya could hear the sounds of the crowd growing larger. Word was spreading through the neighborhood that something big was happening at Rosie's diner. Colonel Williams, Maya said, I think you should probably explain to everyone what's going on. Mrs. Rodriguez looks like she's about to have a heart attack. The colonel nodded. You're absolutely right. And Ms. Johnson? Yes, pack a bag. You're going to Washington. Colonel Williams stepped out of the military vehicle first, with Maya following close behind. The crowd of neighbors had grown to nearly 50 people, and Maya could see news vans pulling up at the far end of the blocked street. Word was spreading fast through the small community. Mrs. Rodriguez rushed over as soon as she saw Maya. Mija, what is happening? Are you okay? Are we in danger? I'm fine, Mrs. Rodriguez, Maya assured her boss, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Colonel Williams is going to explain everything. The colonel had called for a portable microphone, and within minutes a young soldier had set up a small sound system. The crowd pressed closer, their faces showing a mixture of curiosity and concern. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Williams began, her voice carrying clearly across the street. "I'm Colonel Patricia Williams with the United States Army. I want to assure you that there is no danger to your community. We are here today because of an extraordinary act of kindness that took place last night at Rosie's Diner." Maya felt dozens of eyes turn toward her. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment, but she forced herself to stand still and listen. Last night, a waitress at this establishment showed compassion to a customer in need. What she didn't know was that her customer was Sergeant First Class Robert Hayes, a decorated veteran who will receive the Congressional Medal of Honor tomorrow in Washington, D.C. A murmur ran through the crowd. Maya saw Mrs. Chen put her hand over her heart, and Bobby from the gas station let out a low whistle. Sergeant Hayes served 3 tours of duty overseas and distinguished himself in combat in ways that have remained classified for national security reasons until now. Colonel Williams paused, letting that information sink in. His actions during a particular battle in 1982 saved the lives of his entire platoon and prevented what could have been a significant loss of American lives. Maya found herself holding her breath. The man she had served meatloaf and mashed potatoes to was a war hero of the highest order. The battle took place in a remote location during a classified operation. Colonel Williams continued. Sergeant Hayes's unit was ambushed while escorting important personnel through hostile territory. When their position was overrun, Sergeant Hayes single-handedly held off enemy forces while his comrades evacuated the wounded. The crowd was completely silent now. Even the children who had been playing nearby had stopped to listen. Sergeant Hayes was shot 3 times during the engagement. Despite his wounds, he continued fighting and successfully called in air support that turned the tide of the battle. When rescue arrived, they found him still at his position, unconscious from blood loss but alive. Maya felt tears forming in her eyes as she thought about Robert sitting quietly in that booth, studying menu prices and trying to make his limited money stretch. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor was submitted immediately after the battle, Colonel Williams said. However, due to the classified nature of the operation and various bureaucratic delays, the paperwork was lost in the system for decades. Mrs. Rodriguez stepped forward. "But why are you here now? What does this have to do with my restaurant?" Last night, after receiving kindness from one of your employees, Sergeant Hayes contacted his former commanding officer for the first time in 15 years. During that conversation, he mentioned the young woman who had reminded him that there was still goodness in the world. Colonel Williams turned to look directly at Maya. Sergeant Hayes told his commanding officer that he had been living with survivor's guilt for 40 years, wondering if his sacrifice had meant anything. He said that the kindness shown to him by Maya Johnson had restored his faith in the values he had fought to protect. The revelation hit Maya like a physical blow. Robert hadn't just been hungry last night. He had been struggling with something much deeper, something that her simple gesture had somehow helped to heal. As a result of that conversation, Sergeant Hayes made a specific request. Colonel Williams continued. He asked that Maya Johnson be invited to attend tomorrow's Medal of Honor ceremony as his personal guest. The Department of Defense has approved this request. The crowd erupted in excited chatter. Maya heard someone say, "That's amazing," and another person started clapping. Soon the entire crowd was applauding, and Maya felt like she might faint from the overwhelming attention. Mrs. Rodriguez grabbed Maya's arm. "You're going to meet the president?" "I guess so," Maya managed to say. Colonel Williams raised her hand for quiet. "There's more you should know about Sergeant Hayes and why last night was so significant." The crowd settled down again, eager to hear the rest of the story. After returning from overseas, Sergeant Hayes struggled with what we now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Like many veterans of his generation, he received little support for his mental health challenges. He lost touch with his family, had difficulty maintaining employment, and eventually became isolated from his community. Maya thought about the sadness she had seen in Robert's eyes, the way he had moved like someone carrying an invisible weight. For the past 2 years, since his wife passed away, Sergeant Hayes has been living alone in a small apartment about 6 blocks from here. His only income is a modest military pension, and he has been too proud to seek assistance. The pieces were falling into place for Maya. Robert's careful study of the menu prices, his embarrassment when his card was declined, his reluctance to accept help even when he desperately needed it. Last night, Sergeant Hayes was at his lowest point, Colonel Williams said quietly. He later told his commanding officer that he had been questioning whether his life had any meaning, whether the sacrifices he made during his service had been worth it. Maya felt her heart breaking. While she had been worried about getting home to her kids and finishing her shift, Robert had been fighting a battle against despair. Your act of kindness, Ms. Johnson, came at exactly the moment when Sergeant Hayes needed to be reminded that compassion still exists in the world. According to his own words, you quite literally saved his life. The weight of those words settled over Maya like a blanket. She had thought she was just buying dinner for a struggling customer. She had no idea she was helping to save a war hero from his darkest moment. The military coin that Sergeant Hayes gave to Ms. Johnson last night, Colonel Williams continued, is a unit commendation coin presented to him by his commanding officer immediately after the battle that earned him the Medal of Honor. It is one of fewer than 12 in existence and is worth approximately $50,000, gasps rippled through the crowd. Maya's hand instinctively went to her pocket where the coin rested. But its monetary value is nothing compared to its emotional significance to Sergeant Hayes. He has carried that coin for 43 years, through his darkest moments, as a reminder of his service and sacrifice. The fact that he gave it to Ms. Johnson demonstrates the profound impact her kindness had on him. Mrs. Rodriguez was crying now. Robert comes in here sometimes. Always orders the cheapest thing on the menu. I had no idea. Many veterans struggle in silence, Colonel Williams said. They carry their burdens alone, often feeling forgotten by the society they served. What happened last night is a reminder that small acts of kindness can have enormous consequences. A reporter had somehow made it through the police barrier and was furiously taking notes. Maya realized that this story was about to become much bigger than just their small neighborhood. What happens now? Someone in the crowd called out. Ms. Johnson will accompany Sergeant Hayes to Washington, D.C. for tomorrow's ceremony, Colonel Williams announced. The story of their meeting will be part of the official record of Sergeant Hayes's Medal of Honor citation. Maya felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening. 24 hours ago, she had been a single mother working at a diner, worried about paying bills and raising her kids. Now she was being invited to a presidential ceremony because of a $12 meal. Colonel Williams, Maya said, stepping forward. Can I ask you something? Of course. How did you find me so quickly? I mean, Robert only called his commanding officer last night. The colonel smiled. When a Medal of Honor recipient makes a special request involving a civilian, the entire Department of Defense mobilizes to make it happen. We had investigators here within hours, reviewing security footage from the diner, conducting background checks and coordinating with local authorities. Maya shook her head in amazement. All of that for me? All of that for someone who represents the best of what America stands for, Colonel Williams corrected. Sergeant Hayes spent 40 years wondering if anyone remembered what he fought for. You reminded him that the values he defended are still alive in people like you. The crowd began to disperse as people headed off to work or school, but many stopped to shake Maya's hand or congratulate her. Mrs. Rodriguez was still crying, alternating between pride and disbelief. I can't believe this is happening, Maya said to Colonel Williams as the street began to clear. Ms. Johnson, in my 30 years of military service, I have seen many acts of heroism. Some involve facing enemy fire. Others involve split-second decisions that save lives. But what you did last night required a different kind of courage. All I did was buy someone dinner. You saw a fellow human being in need and responded with compassion, even though it cost you something. You treated a stranger with dignity when he had been stripped of almost everything else. That kind of moral courage is rarer than you might think. Maya looked back at Rosie's diner, where she had worked the same routine job for 3 years. Yesterday, it had been just a place to had helped her pay the bills. Today, it was the setting for a story that would be told at the highest levels of government. Colonel Williams, Maya said, there's something I need to ask you. What's that? When we go to Washington tomorrow, will I be able to tell Robert something? Of course. What do you want to tell him? Maya smiled, thinking about her grandfather's stories of kindness from strangers during his hardest times. I want to tell him that he reminded me why small acts of kindness matter. He thinks I saved him, but the truth is he saved me too. Colonel Williams nodded approvingly. I think Sergeant Hayes would very much like to hear that, Ms. Johnson. As the military vehicles began to pull away from Rosie's diner, Maya realized that her life had just changed forever. not because of anything she had set out to do, but because she had simply chosen to treat another person with the dignity and compassion that everyone deserves. Tomorrow, she would stand in the presence of the President of the United States and watch a true American hero receive long overdue recognition. But the most important part of the story had already happened in a small diner on a rainy night, when two people found exactly what they needed in each other's kindness. By noon, the news vans had multiplied like rabbits outside Rosie's diner. Maya watched through the window as reporters set up cameras and interviewed anyone willing to talk about the morning's events. Mrs. Rodriguez had reopened the restaurant, but instead of the usual lunch crowd of regulars, they were serving journalists, curiosity seekers, and people who had driven from neighboring towns just to see where the story had unfolded. Maya's phone hadn't stopped buzzing since Colonel Williams had left. Text messages from friends, missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize, and notifications from social media accounts she rarely used. Somehow, word had spread beyond their small community faster than she could have imagined. "Maya, Table 4 wants to know if they can sit in the booth where you served the war hero," called Tony, the lunch shift cook, looking both amused and overwhelmed. Maya shook her head in disbelief. "It's just a booth, Tony." "Not anymore," said Mrs. Rodriguez, approaching with a stack of newspaper clippings that people had already started bringing in. "Look at this." The local newspaper had managed to put together a special afternoon edition with the headline, "Local Waitress Invited to Medal of Honor Ceremony." But it wasn't just the local paper. Mrs. Rodriguez showed Maya articles on news websites from 3 different states, all telling variations of the same story. "How is this spreading so fast?" Maya asked. "Someone filmed Colonel Williams's announcement with their phone," Mrs. Rodriguez explained. "It's been shared thousands of times already." Maya pulled out her own phone and for the first time that day opened her social media. Her notifications were overwhelming. The video of Colonel Williams explaining Robert's story was everywhere, and people were commenting faster than she could read. "This is what America is about. Faith in humanity restored. We need more people like Maya Johnson. True heroes come in all forms." The attention was both wonderful and terrifying. Maya had always been a private person, someone who preferred to help quietly without drawing attention to herself. Now her name was being shared by strangers across the country. A young woman with a press badge approached Maya's section. "Excuse me, are you Maya Johnson?" "Yes," Maya replied cautiously. "I'm Jessica Park from Channel 7 News. Would you be willing to do a brief interview about what happened last night?" Maya looked around the busy diner. Every table was full, and she could see more people waiting outside. "I'm actually working right now." "We could work around your schedule," Jessica said quickly. "This is a really important story. People need to hear about kindness like this." Before Maya could respond, Mrs. Rodriguez appeared at her side. "Maya, take all the time you need. Anna can cover your tables." Maya found herself sitting across from a news camera 15 minutes later, still wearing her work uniform and feeling completely out of her element. Jessica Park was professional and kind, but Maya couldn't shake the feeling that she was in some kind of strange dream. "So Maya, tell us what went through your mind when you decided to pay for Robert's dinner last night." Maya looked into the camera, thinking about how to explain something that had felt so natural at the time. "I wasn't really thinking, to be honest. I just saw someone who needed help and I knew I could provide it. My grandfather always taught me that we're all just one bad day away from needing someone else's kindness." "Did you have any idea who Robert was?" "None at all. He was just a customer who reminded me of my grandfather. I could tell he was struggling, and I've been there myself. When you've worried about having enough money for groceries, you recognize that look in someone else's eyes." The interview continued for about 10 minutes, with Jessica asking about Maya's background, her family, and her thoughts about being invited to the Medal of Honor ceremony. When it was over, Maya felt drained but also oddly proud. She had managed to explain her actions without making herself sound like a hero, which was important to her. As the news crew packed up their equipment, Maya's phone rang. The caller ID showed her sister's name. "Girl, you're on the news," her sister practically shouted into the phone. "I'm watching you on Channel 7 right now." "I know, I just finished filming it." Mom called me crying. She's so proud she can barely speak. She keeps saying that Grandpa would have loved this story. Maya felt her own eyes getting teary. Her grandfather had passed away 5 years ago, but she knew her sister was right. He would have understood exactly why she had helped Robert, and he would have been proud of her for not making a big deal about it. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of customers, phone calls, and people wanting to shake her hand. Maya tried to maintain some sense of normalcy, taking orders and serving food, but everything felt different. People looked at her with a mixture of admiration and curiosity that made her uncomfortable. Around 3 o'clock, a well-dressed man in his 50s approached her station. Unlike the reporters and curious neighbors, he moved with a quiet dignity that reminded her of Robert. "Are you Maya Johnson?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "My name is David Chen. I'm a veteran myself, served 2 tours in Afghanistan." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I wanted to thank you for what you did for Sergeant Hayes." Maya set down the coffee pot she had been holding. "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do," David said firmly. "You have no idea how many veterans are struggling the way Robert was. We come home and the world moves on, and sometimes we feel invisible. What you did for him, you did for all of us." They talked for a few minutes about David's own experiences coming home from overseas. He told her about the challenges of readjusting to civilian life, the difficulty of finding work that felt meaningful after military service, and the isolation that many veterans experienced. "The thing is," David said as he prepared to leave, "most people want to help veterans, but they don't know how. They see us as either heroes or victims, but rarely as just regular people who sometimes need a helping hand. You treated Robert like a human being. That matters more than you know." As David left, Maya realized that the impact of her actions was spreading in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about Robert anymore. The story was resonating with people because it represented something larger about how we treat each other. Mrs. Rodriguez approached during a brief lull in the lunch rush. "Maya, we need to talk." They stepped into the small office behind the kitchen, where Mrs. Rodriguez closed the door and sat down heavily in her desk chair. "I have something to tell you," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." Maya felt a flutter of worry. "What is it?" "The diner is in trouble. Has been for months. I've been trying to keep it going, but the bills keep piling up and we're not making enough to cover expenses." Mrs. Rodriguez looked exhausted. "I was going to have to close next month." Maya felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Rosie's diner wasn't just her job, it was like a second home. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I had no idea. I didn't want to worry anyone. I kept thinking I could find a way to turn things around." Mrs. Rodriguez managed a weak smile. "But today something incredible happened." "What?" "Since this morning, we've served more customers than we usually see in a week. My phone hasn't stopped ringing with people wanting to make reservations. The local tourism board called to ask about adding us to their restaurant guide." Maya stared at her boss, trying to process what she was hearing. "That's not all," Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "I've had 3 different investors call asking about buying the building, not to tear it down, but to expand the restaurant. One of them specifically mentioned wanting to create a community space for veterans. The implications were staggering. Maya's simple act of kindness toward Robert wasn't just changing her own life. It was potentially saving the livelihood of everyone who worked at the diner. "There's something else," Mrs. Rodriguez said, pulling out her phone. "Look at this." She showed Maya a crowdfunding page that someone had set up called Support Rosie's Diner, Where Kindness Lives. In less than 6 hours, it had raised over $15,000 from people who wanted to support the restaurant where Maya had helped Robert. "People are donating from all over the country," Ms. Rodriguez explained. "Some of them are veterans, some are just people who were moved by the story. They want to make sure this place stays open." Maya sat down in the chair across from Mrs. Rodriguez, overwhelmed by the ripple effects of what had started as a $12 meal. "Mrs. Rodriguez, this is incredible, but I don't want people to think I did this for attention or money. Nobody thinks that, mija. People can tell the difference between genuine kindness and someone looking for recognition. What you did came from the heart, and that's why it's touching so many people." As Maya returned to the dining room, she noticed that the atmosphere in the restaurant had changed. It wasn't just busy, it was alive in a way she had never experienced before. Customers were talking to each other across tables. Strangers were sharing stories about their own experiences with kindness, and there was a sense of community that felt almost magical. Around 5 o'clock, As Maya was preparing to end her shift and go home to pack for Washington, D.C., a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. Robert stood there looking somewhat overwhelmed by the crowd and attention, but his eyes found Maya immediately. The sadness that had been so evident the night before was gone, replaced by something that looked like hope. The entire restaurant noticed him at the same time. Conversation stopped, and for a moment everyone just stared at the man who had unknowingly started this extraordinary chain of events. Then someone started clapping. Within seconds, the entire restaurant was on its feet, applauding Robert with genuine warmth and respect. Maya watched as tears streamed down his face, and she realized that this was probably the first time in years that he had felt truly seen and appreciated by his community. Robert made his way through the crowd toward Maya, shaking hands and accepting kind words from strangers who now knew his story. When he reached her, they looked at each other for a moment without speaking. "I hear we're going to Washington together," he said finally. "I guess we are," Maya replied. "Are you ready for this?" Robert looked around the restaurant full of people who had come to celebrate both his service and Maya's kindness. "I don't think anyone could be ready for this, but for the first time in a very long time, I'm excited to find out what happens next." As Maya prepared to leave work that evening, she realized that she wasn't the same person who had arrived that morning. The events of the day had shown her that small acts of kindness could create waves of change that reached far beyond what anyone could imagine. Tomorrow, she would stand next to a war hero as he received the nation's highest military honor. But tonight she would go home to her children and try to explain how buying someone dinner had somehow changed not just their lives, but the lives of everyone around them. The transformation wasn't just happening to Maya and Robert. It was happening to their entire community, one conversation and one act of kindness at a time. The East Room of the White House was unlike anything Maya had ever imagined. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling like frozen fireworks, and the walls were lined with paintings of presidents she had only seen in history books. She stood near the front row of chairs, wearing a navy blue dress that her sister had insisted on buying for the occasion, trying to process that she was actually here. Robert sat in the front row dressed in his formal military uniform. Maya had barely recognized him that morning when they met at the hotel. Gone was the tired, defeated man from the diner. In his place sat a decorated soldier who carried himself with the dignity and pride that had been buried under years of struggle and isolation. The ceremony was scheduled to begin in 10 minutes, and the room was filling with military officials, government leaders, and family members of other Medal of Honor recipients. Maya felt completely out of place among all the formal uniforms and expensive suits. But every time she started to feel overwhelmed, Robert would catch her eye and smile, reminding her why she was there. Colonel Williams appeared at Maya's side. "How are you holding up?" "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and find out this was all a dream," Maya admitted. "It's real," Colonel Williams assured her. "And it's important. What happened between you and Sergeant Hayes represents the best of what our country stands for." A military aide approached the front of the room and announced that the president would be entering momentarily. Maya felt her heart start racing as everyone in the room stood and faced the doorway. When the president entered, Maya was struck by how normal he seemed, despite being the most powerful person in the world. He moved through the room, shaking hands and speaking quietly with various attendees before taking his position at the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen," the president began, "we gather today to honor extraordinary acts of courage and sacrifice. The Medal of Honor is our nation's highest military decoration, reserved for those who have distinguished themselves through conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity, at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty." Maya listened as the president spoke about the history of the Medal of Honor and the select group of individuals who had earned it. She thought about Robert sitting quietly in that diner booth, carrying the weight of his unrecognized heroism for over 40 years. Today, we have the privilege of honoring Sergeant First Class Robert Hayes for actions that took place during classified operations in 1982, the president continued. Sergeant Hayes's heroism saved the lives of his entire platoon and prevented what could have been a significant loss of American personnel. The president then began to read from the official citation, describing in detail the battle that had earned Robert the Medal of Honor. Maya listened in amazement as she learned the full extent of what Robert had done that day so many years ago. When his unit came under heavy enemy fire, Sergeant Hayes immediately moved to an exposed position to provide covering fire for his retreating comrades. Despite being wounded multiple times, he continued to engage the enemy for over 3 hours, allowing all members of his platoon to reach safety. Maya looked at Robert, who was sitting perfectly still, his eyes focused straight ahead. She could only imagine what he was feeling as the details of that terrible day were recounted in front of all these people. Sergeant Hayes remained at his post until air support arrived, even after losing consciousness from blood loss. His actions that day exemplify the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Army. When the president called Robert's name, he stood and walked to the front of the room with measured steps. Maya watched as the president placed the Medal of Honor around Robert's neck, and she felt tears streaming down her face. The room erupted in applause, but Maya barely heard it. She was thinking about the man who had sat in her section just 2 nights ago, counting change and trying to decide if he could afford dinner. Now he was receiving the highest honor his country could bestow, and somehow she had played a small part in this moment. After the medal was presented, the president invited Robert to say a few words. Robert approached the microphone, and for a moment, he just stood there looking out at the assembled crowd. 43 years ago, I did what I thought was necessary to bring my brothers home, Robert began, his voice steady and clear. I never thought of myself as a hero. Heroes were the people who didn't make it back, who gave everything for their country and their comrades. Maya could see how difficult this was for him, but his voice never wavered. For many years after that day, I struggled to understand why I survived when others didn't. I carried guilt and pain that I couldn't share with anyone. I felt forgotten by the world I had fought to protect. Robert paused, and Maya saw him look directly at her. 2 nights ago, a young woman reminded me why I fought in the first place. She showed me kindness when I needed it most, and she treated me with dignity when I had almost forgotten what that felt like. Her simple act of compassion reminded me that the values we defend in uniform are alive and well in people like her. The room was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Maya Johnson, you are sitting in the front row today not because you did anything extraordinary, but because you did something that should be ordinary. You saw a fellow human being in need, and you responded with kindness. That is what America is supposed to be about. Robert's voice became stronger as he continued. This medal belongs not just to me, but to every person who chooses compassion over indifference, who sees dignity in every human being, and who understands that our strength as a nation comes from how we treat each other, especially in our most vulnerable moments. When Robert finished speaking, the applause was thunderous. Maya felt like her heart might burst from pride and emotion. She had come here thinking she was just a guest at someone else's important moment. But Robert had made her part of the story in a way that honored both of them. After the ceremony, there was a reception in another part of the White House. Maya found herself surrounded by people wanting to hear about the night at the diner, but she tried to keep the focus on Robert and his service rather than her own actions. The president approached her during the reception, and Maya felt her knees go weak. Ms. Johnson, I wanted to personally thank you for what you did for Sergeant Hayes, he said, shaking her hand. Your kindness helped bring a war hero out of the shadows and reminded all of us why these ceremonies matter. Thank you, Mr. President, but I really didn't do anything special. That's exactly what makes it special, he replied. True character shows itself in the moments when no one is watching, when there's no recognition or reward. You acted from the heart and it changed a man's life. As the reception continued, Maya had the opportunity to meet other Medal of Honor recipients and their families. She heard stories of incredible courage and sacrifice, and she began to understand that she was part of a community of people who understood the true meaning of service and honor. Late in the afternoon, as the official events were winding down, Maya and Robert found themselves alone for a few minutes in a quiet corner of the reception room. Robert, I need to tell you something, Maya said. You think I saved you that night, but the truth is you saved me too. How do you figure that? I've been working at that diner for 3 years, just going through the motions, worried about bills and wondering if anything I did really mattered. Meeting you reminded me that every interaction we have with another person is an opportunity to make a difference. Robert smiled. Sounds like we saved each other. I guess we did. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the other guests mingle and share stories. What happens now? Maya asked. Now we go home and try to live up to all this attention, Robert said with a chuckle. I hear the diner has been packed every day since the story broke. Maya laughed. Mrs. Rodriguez says she's never seen anything like it. People are driving from 3 states away just to eat at the place where we met. And the crowdfunding campaign? Over $100,000 as of this morning. Mrs. Rodriguez is talking about expanding the restaurant and creating a community space for veterans. She wants to call it Robert's Room. Robert's eyes misted over. I don't know what to say to that. You don't have to say anything. Just let people honor you the way you deserve to be honored. As they prepared to leave the White House, Maya reflected on how much her life had changed in just 3 days. She had gone from being a single mother working at a diner to being invited to the White House and meeting the president. But more importantly, she had learned that her grandfather was right about the power of kindness to change the world. The flight home was quiet, with both Maya and Robert lost in their own thoughts about the day's events. When they landed, they were met by a crowd of reporters and well-wishers, but also by Maya's children and Mrs. Rodriguez, who had driven to the airport to welcome them home. Maya's youngest daughter ran into her arms, and for the first time since this whole adventure began, Maya felt like she was back in her real life. Mommy, did you really meet the president? Her daughter asked. I did, baby. And I met a real hero too, Maya said, looking at Robert. Over the following weeks, the story continued to resonate far beyond their small community. The crowdfunding campaign for Rosie's Diner reached $200,000, enough to not only save the restaurant but transform it into something unprecedented. Mrs. Rodriguez expanded the diner into the building next door, creating a community center that offered free meals to veterans every Sunday, job training programs for people re-entering the workforce, and a quiet space where anyone could come for a good meal and respectful treatment. Maya was offered jobs at larger restaurants and even a book deal, but she chose to stay at Rosie's. The work felt different now, though. Every customer she served was an opportunity to practice the kind of kindness that had started this whole chain of events. Robert became a regular fixture at the diner, not as a struggling customer, but as a volunteer who helped serve meals to other veterans and shared his story with anyone who wanted to hear it. The sadness that had marked his face that first night was gone, replaced by a sense of purpose and community that had been missing from his life for decades. 6 months after the Medal of Honor ceremony, Maya was working her usual evening shift when a young veteran came in, studying the menu carefully and counting change in his pocket. She watched him for a moment, recognizing the familiar signs of someone trying to make limited money stretch as far as possible. Maya approached his table with a smile, thinking about her grandfather's lessons and Robert's example of how small acts of kindness could ripple outward in ways no one could predict. Good evening, she said, setting down a menu. What can I get you tonight? As the young man looked up at her with grateful eyes, Maya realized that this was how change really happened in the world. Not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through ordinary people choosing to treat each other with dignity and compassion, one interaction at a time. The story that had begun with a $12 meal had become something much larger, but at its heart, it remained beautifully simple. 2 people finding exactly what they needed in each other's kindness, and a community discovering that the values worth fighting for were alive and well in the everyday choices of ordinary people. Outside the diner windows, life in their small town continued much as it always had, but with a new understanding that heroes come in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful force in the world is simply one person choosing to care about another.